live?
We are, but we don't see the screen.
Oh,
Let me just see if I can do something.
just 1 minute, technical.
This delay is very always annoying because even if you do some change, you have to wait at least 2 minutes to see the change.
Yeah. Well, even if they can't see the screen, they can see this, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, maybe we just have to start. Oh,
Yeah, that's when I shut down the system. We'll see after the restart if it starts again.
okay.
Okay.
All
It
right.
seems to be starting fine now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We are going to get started. Hello. 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 Good morning. Yes. I need a drill sergeant here. Good morning to you all. Welcome to this Ivy Plus Libraries Forum. And I wish to welcome everyone who's in the room and coming in remotely. Because we are streaming this and recording, I ask that all the speakers, don't get too far away from the mic and repeat questions when we get to the question parts of the presentation. So we'll have today, we'll start off with Susan giving some brief remarks, and then we'll have updates from our two Ivy Plus Library directors of our various initiatives, Heidi Nance for resource sharing and Gladriel Chilton with collection development. And then we're going to have, we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers, and then we'll drop into some quick lightning talks about various ways that YUL staff are engaging with Ivy Plus libraries. And I want to emphasize the word some, because this isn't everyone who's engaged in Ivy Plus initiatives. I know many of you in the room are a part of different Ivy Plus groups or working on different projects, but this is just to highlight some of the ways that we are engaging with Ivy Plus. And really, Ivy Plus Libraries is us, so we're all a part of it to some way or some extent or the other. And with that, I will turn it over to Susan.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for showing up. It will warm up in here. I know it's a little chilly to start with, but it's going to get warmer. So what I wanted to do is just give a little bit of a preface to make sure as we go through the different agenda items today, you sort of have the bigger picture of what we're trying to do here. So in October of last year, the ULs, the University Librarians of the Ivy Plus group got together. And we decided in that retreat, and we had a facilitator work with us, that what we've been doing within Ivy Plus up to then has been terrific and great, but we really felt like we were hitting a point at which we were crossing a threshold into a much, much more formal collaboration. And so what came out of that large meeting was 3 areas that we agreed we were going to focus on. Because as you can imagine, throughout Ivy Plus, we have lots of points of contact, and there's lots of things we could be doing with our partners. But if we did not focus, it was going to be more scattershot rather than impactful. And the 3 areas that came out of it was, number 1, the sustainability and improvement of Borrow Direct. As we all know, Borrow Direct is essential. Our communities love Borrow Direct, yet it is on pretty dated technology. It's a little cranky and breaks down at times and things like that. So we really want to rethink the architecture of Borrow Direct and how we give access to our community to the information that is there, because it is so essential to the partnership. The second area was collaborative development and management of collections. And so all of our cooperative collection work that we've done thus far, thinking about the changes we can make into the future, thinking about the preservation and storage of our collections collaboratively, all of this are key areas that we feel are essential and important, and we want our Ivy Plus energies pointed to that as well. And the third area is around collective leadership to change the scholarly communication system through advocacy and action. That's a fuzzier one. That is one that we're still trying to figure out, what is it that we can effectively do? Where is it we can partner with other groups that are working in the same arena, including Neural, including Spark and others. And so that one is still in a formation stage. And there's a group across the Ivy Plus that is helping to come up with what that strategy might look like, or what are some priority areas. But for the first two, it's pretty clear what it is we're trying to do. And what I want to emphasize to all of you is that for us, Ivy Plus is key to our strategy. It is not something on the side here that when we have some free time we want to take a look at and play in. We are fully committed and want Ivy Plus to be part of the strategy going forward for us. And so that means as we develop our collections, we're doing it in thinking about the Ivy Plus consortium. As we are providing access and knowledge of what's in our collections, we want to think about the Ivy Plus collections as we do our local collections. That all of this needs to start coming together, and we not create even more silos that says, here's ours, here's theirs, but rather that our users get to see across the entire spectrum and be able to work easily with those collections from across the entire spectrum. So this for us is a change. You know, we weren't talking about it in the same way, just 5 years ago. So for all of us, what that means is at times we're going to be asked to reprioritize what we're doing locally to make room for the Ivy Plus work to happen as well. And we'll see that through some of the projects that are talked about today. We really have to put some time and effort for them to be successful, as well as resources, and we have to reprioritize the work we're doing. So conversations need to be happening across the entire library system so that when we feel that point where we're being sort of pressured to go in two directions, local versus the collaboration, we want to be very conscious about what decisions we make at those points and make sure that we have those conversations with everybody else in the library organization, and that we're very conscious what those trade-offs are going to be. So I hope throughout today you'll come to understand even more what is going on within the Ivy Plus Consortium. There are a lot of points, even just within that smaller 3 areas of focus, there's still a lot of stuff that's going on. So you'll understand, hopefully, come away with a greater understanding of what's happening, what changes are on the horizon, what projects are in the work, and maybe ways that you can contribute further than you already have. So ask lots of questions. This is meant to be a Q&A kind of sessions at different points. So there'll be presentations and then times for questions. So use this as an opportunity to learn and then follow up. If you don't come away with fully understanding everything today, that's just fine. We have great staff here in Heidi and Gladriel who I'm sure will be glad to pull you in further and help explain what's going on. All right, so thank you very much for taking the time today, and I pass it on to Heidi and Gladriel.
Good morning, everyone. And as Susan said, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk and hear about Ivy Plus Libraries and the partnership today. Heidi and I are going to give brief updates talking about Ivy Plus Libraries overall, collection development and management, as well as resource sharing. You'll notice throughout our slides there's birds. And the reason there are birds is because the amazing potential that I see in Ivy Plus libraries is much like a flock of snow geese or like a group of sparrows. When they come together, they are still individuals, but when they come together, they go faster and they are more efficient, and they come to an agreement about where they are going, and it is amazing. So there's birds throughout, and it's meant to represent what is Ivy Plus Libraries and meant to capture a bit about the amazing potential that I've seen in the past 2 years and the amazing energy that my colleagues throughout the partnership have. It's incredibly inspiring. Oops.
Oh, thank you. So for those of you watching online, this is Heidi Nance, the Director of Resource Sharing Initiatives. And what we're looking at on this slide is I've been working very closely with Galadriel and with my other colleagues throughout Ivy Plus Libraries to really focus on these 3 strategic priorities that Susan mentioned. And so one of the things that we've been working hard to do is to not think of these strategic priorities as silos, but rather to think of them as a series of overlapping circles or a beautiful Venn diagram. And on any given initiative or project, there's a certain amount of overlap. Sometimes it's 100% overlap, for others it's partial, but there always is this interconnection between collections and resource sharing and now advocacy and scholarly communications. And so originally, when I created this Venn diagram, there were 3 separate circles that overlapped, with leadership and advocacy and scholarly communications being the 3rd circle. But as Galadriel and I began discussing and talking with this group and talking with our partners, we realized that that's really an overarching theme in many ways. You know, advocacy and scholarly communications looks different in resource sharing, perhaps, maybe, than it does in collection development, maybe not. Maybe it's licenses for ebooks, maybe it's new models of access. But in any case, these 3 areas overlap heavily, and what this means in practice is that we're working very hard over time as we work on these projects to bring a very diverse set of cross-functional as well as cross perspectives, working across different organizational strata within libraries, working with people at different administrative levels, and working with people in different groups. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Bar Direct Shared Index.
So one of the things we're going to be doing as we go through our updates today is talking about programs, initiatives, and projects. So to help us have context and a framework, here's a few definitions. And these slides will definitely be shared throughout YUL, so no need to take notes or memorize this at this time. A program is a UL-approved established operation with dedicated staff. The examples are Borrow Direct and the Ivy Plus Libraries Web Collecting Program. An initiative is a UL approved by 10 or more ULs, or something that is working to seek UL approval, and is a cross-institutional effort supported by the in-kind contributions of multiple staff across the partnership. All initiatives come through one of the strategic priority groups, that is resource sharing, collection development, or the Leadership and Advocacy and Scholarly Communication Task Force, and they are all in support of the 3 strategic priorities that Susan mentioned. There's also a number of projects that are happening, and these projects are smaller than initiatives. They may be looking to improve a program. They may be in support of investigating whether an initiative is a viable thing to pursue or not. But in general, those are the 3 categories for the kinds of work that is happening in the various groups and in cross-functional groups as well.
So this slide is my attempt to fit all of Ivy Plus Libraries onto a single PowerPoint slide. I got close. I didn't fully succeed. I didn't get all of the groups on here. But essentially, I wanted to frame the partnership for you very broadly. You know, there are 13 institutions. We have 3 strategic priorities, 4 staff. So in addition to Galadriel and myself, we have Samantha Abrams, who's the Web Resources Collecting Librarian, and she has an assistant in Jean Park. And we have 2 standing programs. So whenever I give presentations or people aren't quite sure who or what Ivy Plus Libraries is, this is the slide I bring out. So it's very useful to bring out in presentations. And also, if you would like to reuse this slide, please feel free to.
And I mentioned initiatives, and this is really just to give you a very quick image that shows you the initiatives that are in process right now, UL approved initiatives that are going forward, and give you a bit of a timeline about how long they're going to take and through time. So you have the Borrow Direct Shared Index, you have the collection analysis data set feasibility study. You have different things that we're going to talk about in more detail. This is just meant to be the bird's eye view.
So I think it's also been very helpful to begin to understand the framework that the groups fit into. So I imagine that many of you are here because you are part of a group, or you work closely with a group, or you're curious about the work that Ivy Plus Libraries is doing. And so one of the things that the university librarians set up in that last meeting last fall was I looked at not just the strategic priorities, but also how are we going to organize our FTE and our work into groups that support these. So there are 3 strategic priority groups clustered around these strategic priorities that they are identified. And there are also key stakeholder groups. And these, I think, are very, very critical groups that we very closely depend on in order to be able to get our work done. This is assessment, information technology, and technical services. So when we are drafting initiatives or proposals or ideas, we're checking in with these groups regularly, or we certainly intend to, and either support in their perspective to talk about the feasibility and things that we should be looking for. In addition, there are many, many, many affinity groups, which I imagine many of you are part of. And these are groups that are focused on specific areas, and these are also groups that we can be working closely with as we, or at least, very least checking in with and having regular conversation with as we work on these strategic priorities and initiatives.
And this is just a reimagining of that previous slide with blue bubbles showing all of the YUL staff who are involved in Ivy Plus libraries with these various groups. It's a lot. And as Daniel said, we'll be hearing from colleagues later today talking more specifically about their work. Now I'm going to turn it over to Heidi to go more in depth on what's happening with resource sharing. Take it away.
So there's a dearth of bird images with resource sharing, associated with resource sharing. So this was one of the closest that I could come up with. But I had a good 20 minutes on Flickr of trying to identify good images. But I think the idea is that it's not clear whose crumbs are whose. And then and they're taking turns, although the one on who isn't eating looks a little impatient to me. So one of the things that I like to really be sure to highlight when I'm doing presentations or visits is sort of the complexity that is resource sharing. Those of you who are directly involved in resource sharing understand this, but it's not always clear to others. And that is, resource sharing is also, I love Venn diagrams, as you might have noticed. It has many, many layers. And so when I began in my position a little over a year ago, the previous position was primarily focused on Borrow Direct only. In fact, perhaps exclusively on Borrow Direct, which makes sense because it is our flagship core service. It absolutely must be sustained for our users. But Borrow Direct does not exist within a vacuum. It also exists within a larger environment of resource sharing that happens outside of the Borrow Direct, sometimes between Ivy Plus libraries, sometimes between Ivy Plus libraries and other consortia. So it's a very complex and layered environment. And so what I'm really interested in learning is, what are we sharing with each other? What are we sharing or borrowing from other consortia or other groups that we might be able to share with each other if we change some things? What do we need more copies of? So I'm really looking at this very broad spectrum of what is resource sharing. And resource sharing also, I think, is one of those meta activities that focuses on draws on the expertise of many different areas in the library. We hinge on the success of cataloging. We hinge on the success of information technology and systems. We hinge on the success of discovery. And so it's really a very diverse area. Then I will certainly be reaching out to many of you, or have been reaching out to many of you, to seek your expertise on resource sharing matters. So this particular slide, which I'm not expecting anyone to read closely, but this is a vision of Ivy Plus resource sharing borrowing activity since 2012. And what you see is that the blue part of the bar is the activity that was resource sharing activity that went through Borrow Direct. But all of the gray activity is additional resource sharing activity between Ivy Plus libraries that did not go through Borrow Direct. And so what I'm very, very interested in is learning more about that additional 53% that's the gray. So what's happening within there? What are we sharing? How are we sharing it? Are we using the optimal solution? Is there a reason it's not going through a Borrow Direct? What is in there? And so one of the projects that we're working on that I can talk about briefly is a tool that will help us assess all of this data. And this is the reverse image where this is for our lending activity. So what are we sending out? What are you sending out from your library to other libraries? And the orange is Borrow Direct, and the gray is non-borrow direct activity. So all of this to illustrate that borrow direct is, again, clearly a very enormous and core player in our environment, but it's not the only resource sharing that we do. So one of my goals, it's very interesting to me, I'm so happy to be here today because one of my very first site visits with Ivy Plus Libraries was here at Yale, and I think that that was so foundational in helping to shape my understanding of the partnership and to talk to Susan and to talk to Galadriel, and I just really appreciate your support in shaping my vision of what this position could do. And one of the things that came out of that first site visit was a conversation I had with Heather in one of the meetings where we talked about making the collective collection look and feel and act as much like the local collection as possible so that your users can use the other Ivy Plus Libraries collection hopefully as seamlessly as they would use their own. Now, that's not always easy, and sometimes it's not always possible, but are there ways that we can begin to bridge that gap? You know, can it arrive as quickly? Can it have a similar loan period? Can it have similar policies around it? Can you borrow and use similar kinds of things, similar types of items? So that's been an ongoing goal of mine and permeating many of my conversations. So a lot of the work that you see that I'll be talking about in initiatives are really tools and methods to try to get us closer to that type of environment. And then one of my other primary goals is really to, again, overlapping Venn diagrams, is to support the work of collections by helping to help us effectively size a collection. How many copies do you need? Maybe you don't need that many copies. Maybe you need more copies. Effectively format. Do you need this electronically? Do you need this in print? Do you need this in a different format? Maybe, maybe not. And then also effectively focus. And by this I mean, what are you purchasing that is being heavily used by your people or by other people, and what are you not that is being heavily used by your people or other Ivy Plus libraries? And if you're able to borrow these items from other libraries, do you really need a copy, or could you repurpose that time and attention and funds to collect differently? I can't answer those collection questions, but I can hopefully provide you a snapshot of what your users are doing and how other users are using the Yale collection to help inform those conversations and those decisions. So the two groups that I work most closely with are the resource sharing group, and Mike Bell and Jessica Bauer, who are here today, are on those groups. And then the second one is the Borrow Direct Operations group, and Jessica Bauer is also on that one. She's very busy. And Chris and Lauren Brown as well. And this group focuses heavily on more of the day-to-day operations of Borrow Direct, as well as resource sharing a little bit more broadly between Ivy Plus libraries. So this is a list of some of the projects and initiatives that we have going on currently within resource sharing. I certainly won't have time to get into all of them, but there were a couple of them that I wanted to focus on just a little bit in the very few minutes that I have. And one of them is the Borrow Direct Shared Index, which I understand we've been talking about quite a bit here. And I won't spend too much time focusing on the reasons that we're doing this, except to say that we're trying to solve two primary problems. We're trying to expand discovery of the 90 million records or 90 million items that are available to your users by making these items more easily discoverable and more easily usable. And so the shared index is intended to provide a framework where you can take the records for other Ivy Plus libraries and make them visible within your discovery layer in a way that you wish. So right now that's not currently possible. So right now if you're doing a search within your catalog, you're only seeing your own local items. So this will expand that discovery. It will also improve some of the situations where users are not finding things in our current discovery layer because of the way that the search algorithm and the technology is working. Frequently searches fail because it simply doesn't find something using the tools that it's using. So while there's a very high fill rate for Borrow Direct, which is 95%, what we're not seeing is all of the times that somebody searched for something and didn't get a result and thus didn't place a request for something that may have been available or existed. And this is more on those silos. So this is a graph that I put together to try to explain the growing vision for the shared index data universe. This is a working model. It will certainly continue to evolve. But the idea is that for the shared index, we would be able to create three key pieces. One would be a data warehouse, where data from all 13 Ivy Plus libraries could be exported. That data would be somewhat normalized, but not heavily so. It's essentially a big repository, a big warehouse. Layered on top of that, which is the bright, in the middle, the bright blue square, is the index. And this is a subset of that data that would be normalized and optimized for those discovery of those 90 million items. We wouldn't normalize all of the data in the warehouse. We would try to identify what's most useful. What do your users need to see about an item when they've done a search and they've discovered an item? And then layered on top of that would be a standalone BorrowDirect search interface where you're searching all of the collections simultaneously. And we almost didn't propose creating this. And ultimately, in the end, we decided to because it will be useful as a test interface, and there are some use cases at some libraries for having this. But this is really probably only going to be used heavily, I would guess, by about 3 of the Ivy Plus libraries, according to their current plans. Most libraries are trending toward that blue square, where they will surface the records in their local discovery for all the reasons I just outlined. So in addition to those 3 core pieces, we're imagining having, or we will be proposing to the library directors, assuming this is approved, that there be some subgroups temporarily created to support this work. So there would be a discovery working group that would help the conversation around how to search and discover things in the standalone interface. There would be a metadata policy working group that would help to define which data do we need to optimize for discovery. And then there'd be a data warehouse working group, and they would all work up through the current BorrowDirect Shared Index working group. So I think, building on something that Susan said and Galadriel said as well, is that as we begin to do our work together, it is a contribution of time and effort, and that we will depend on the collective expertise of the membership in order to make this successful. But this is also very exciting because this gives you an opportunity to actively shape the future of the collective collection and what it looks like and how your users experience it. So it's very critical that it not be any sort of top-down, Ivy Plus is coming, whatever that would be, would come down and tell you what to do. This is very intentionally collaborative. We talk about radical consensus is a phrase that is often used within the BorrowDirect Shared Index working groups. This is really intended to be a grassroots approach. So this is what we're talking about for the shared index for BorrowDirect. But what's wonderful about this is that this could eventually be expanded for other additional uses. The data warehouse could begin to include other data sets. It could include the data that we're talking about pulling in for the resource sharing assessment tool, which will include ILIA data as well as BorrowDirect data. It could also eventually include a collective collections assessment. If you have this universe of data in this warehouse, let's take some time to look who has what, who has how many copies, in what format, do they circulate, do they not circulate? This gives us so many rich opportunities for assessment of this large data store. And potentially, eventually, we could even do shared cataloging or copy cataloging on some of these records, if particularly for very rare, very unique items. So all of this to say the BorrowDirect Shared Index, while currently envisioned to support BorrowDirect, could be extended for many potential uses if we so choose to do so. I see it as a very foundational project in many ways. So the project timeline for right now is that there's a proposal that will go into the library directors at the September 28th meeting for approval. This ask is only to go to RFP for the project plan that has been outlined. This is not asking at this time for an approval of funds or anything else. It's asking for the working groups to be created and for permission to go to RFP. If that is approved, the RFP will be issued, and the working group intends to provide a recommendation to the library directors by December 15th, and that would include the price tag and the cost for the overall project, as well as a more accurate estimation of the FTE locally that would be involved for the project. If that is approved, the intention is to begin the work right away and to begin building this, hopefully with the final version released, available for use by September 1st. Of next year. A lot of the success of that timeline will depend on the work that will be done locally in the meantime in terms of data remediation and cleanup. So that's something that we're encouraging people to begin thinking about and talking about internally. And the working groups will certainly provide assistance in that as well. So I think I'm running out of time, so I will very quickly go over these last couple of slides. The BorrowDirect Shared Index is intended to provide really exponential growth in the area of discovery of our collective collection and provide a framework for future extension of this data. But it is only half of the BorrowDirect universe. is the discovery half. There's also the fulfillment half, which currently is run through OCLC's Relay D2D tool, which, as Susan pointed out, is very aging and buggy and does not always work effectively. So at some point in the future, I do believe that we will need to replace this. However, it will be very disruptive, I think, to replace it exactly at the same time that we're doing the shared index, assuming that's approved. So this is something that I'm carefully monitoring. I'm working closely with a number of groups working cross-consortially. There are at least 2 viable candidates, but they're largely vaporware right now. And so I'm actively working with the developers to help them develop functional specifications for these in case they become useful candidates for us in the future. So I don't know if any of you know Rob Cardelano from Columbia, but he has an analogy that I like to use. He talks about the speed of projects. Some things go at sprints, some things go at runs, some things go at walk, and some things go at crawl. I would put this somewhere between a walk and a run. We need to be paying close attention to this, but the Borrow Direct Shared Index is currently on a sprint, and hopefully will remain so if approved. And then the assessment tool is a shorter term project that I'm very excited about. As of, I believe, November 28th, this tool will be released. This is a data warehouse, a smaller data warehouse of Borrow Direct transactional data as well as ILIA data that will allow us to begin faceting and providing discovery of data on what are we borrowing from each other, what are we borrowing from other people, what is going unfilled, what do we need more copies of, answer those kinds of questions. And that also has a lot of future extensibility. So I will stop there because I'm certain I'm out of time and see if there are any questions. It was a lot of information all at once. Yes, Mike.
Just a clarification, the slides that you showed that transactional activity, the non-borrow direct transactions, were those just the inter-value plus parallel transactions, or were those all of the non-borrow direct transactions that libraries are participating in?
That's a very good question. I think I misspoke. That is all of the resource sharing transactions that are done by your libraries, whether they're between Ivy Plus libraries or not. The part of the reason I'm so interested in assessing this is to see if there are other consortia that we could strategically partner with to obtain some of those materials, and also to find out if we're needing to go outside of Ivy Plus libraries when there may be available copies within Ivy Plus libraries that are not circulating for policy or other reasons. So it may also be informative to say, well, maybe we don't need to purchase those because we're able to rely so effectively on our other consortial partners as well. So I don't know what the answer will be to what we learn, but I think that seeing that will be very illustrative. So thank you for asking. That included articles as well. So unfortunately, so the way I got that data, just so you know, is I got the ARL statistics, and I did a quick survey to ask people if they included their Borrow Direct activity within ARL, and all of them did. And so that's how I created that, is I got all the ARL, and then I carved out Borrow Direct activity that I had data for. So I really cannot wait to get all of our collective hands on this ILIA data to look at what that other data is. Is it all articles? I suspect that the majority of it is. I suspect that we're getting the majority of our returnables through Borrow Direct, but I don't know that for sure without seeing the data. That's a good question. Are there any other questions? Well, I also want to take a moment to really acknowledge Marty Kurth, if I can embarrass him. He didn't know I was going to do this. But he's been very helpful on the Borrow Direct Shared Index Working Group, and that work has definitely been going at a sprint, especially lately. And so I just really want to thank him, especially for all of his work, and to thank Galadriel for being such a welcoming Ivy Plus colleague. It was really helpful to not be the very first Ivy Plus Libraries employee, so thank you for doing that. So I will turn it over to you.
So now a quick update on what has been happening within the collection development group. My last update to all of you here at Yale was last spring, so this should just be a very brief update followed with some time for some questions. A recap of how the collection development group works: there's an executive committee with a chair, a past chair, and a chair-elect. There's 1 to 2 representatives from each of the partner institutions. For Yale, that is Julie Linden and Daniel Dollar. There's program management groups, such as the Web Collecting Advisory Group. There's initiative and project working groups, small groups that include collection development representatives and may also include other colleagues throughout the partner institutions. The CD group has 3 in-person meetings annually, once at ALA, and then 1 in the fall and 1 in the spring at one of the partner institutions. The one in the fall coming up is a joint meeting with the resource sharing group. And then we have lots of virtual meetings in between. We share out the minutes from the group through the collection news listserv. If you're not on it, please let me know and I'll make sure that you're there. That's the best way to keep up with what's happening in the collection development group. This is the program. We have the web collecting program, which was developed to capture and collect and archive at-risk online content. It is run by Samantha Abrams, the Web Resources Collection Librarian, with the assistance of Jean Park out of Columbia. The Web Collecting Advisory Group works to govern this program in terms of setting up guidelines, policy, program, reviewing incoming proposals that come to them from across the partnership. Just this past year, there's been 3 new collections that have added, and there are many other proposals that are under review at this time. We also have a collective collections analysis working group that is giving oversight to the work that the collection development group is doing around the collective collection strategic priority. The main initiative that we are working on right now is the collective collections analysis dataset feasibility study. We know our data across the partnership is messy. How messy is it, and how much information can we get out of it to inform our work? What can we tell about our collections? What can we tell about our users? Participating financial and human resources, we have 6 who are part of the pilot. We're considering this a phase 1 pilot effort. Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Brown, Yale, Dartmouth, and Penn. And then contributing financial resources are all the remaining Ivy Plus Libraries partners. This particular initiative, you can't see very well on this screen, this all collections, all formats data. Imagine a gray circle like this. And then within that, you have the resource sharing assessment tool that Heidi mentioned, which is that green dot. And then what this data set feasibility study is looking at is sample data, and it's only this little purple dot to give us an understanding about what is happening. We'll be looking at bibliographic records for single part monographs that were added to the system within systems at each library within a 5-year period, a recent 5-year period. And then we're going to be looking at how can we compare those, what kind of questions can we ask of that data, and how does that inform our collaborative collection development work. Pre-initiative and very much exploratory right now is looking at shared ebooks. Ivy Plus Libraries is the partnership brought to you by Borrow Direct, which is the sharing of print collections. Yet we all have these amazing electronic collections and ebook collections that can't be shared. How can we change that? How can we make sure that the e-collections are part of that collective collection? So there's conversations happening right now with Project Muse, University of Chicago Press, Knowledge Unlatched. Heidi and I are also in conversations with the International Coalition of Library Consortia, where Ivy Plus Libraries and 12 other library consortia are beginning conversations to say, how can we have a wholesale change of licenses for ebooks that enable whole ebook lending? Building on the success of the Virtual Library of Virginia, where they did indeed make some headway in this key licensing area. So we're looking into that, and we're looking to understand where is there an initiative that would give us enough gain that the time and energy and investment to get to that point makes sense in support of the strategic priorities and in support of our users. There is a collection life cycles tool that is also pre-initiative exploration right now. This is especially for colleagues at Princeton and Cornell, and I think Columbia, who were using OCLC WorldCat selection and looking for a tool that would replace that. So that's a quick update. And any questions about collections?
Has there been any discussion at the higher levels of this set out the administration to encourage affinity groups to look at their collections with a view towards diversifying their collections, looking towards ways of encouraging more collecting of women or people of color, these kind of things? This has come up in the music affinity group where we've started looking at our composers and performers that we collect, and there was an analysis done at the International Association of Music Libraries that showed that 18% of our collecting in Ivies Plus for composers was of women and everything else was men, and mostly white men. So is there any discussion at a higher level to encourage these affinity groups to start thinking more in those lines, encouraging us to look at collection development with that kind of eye?
Yes, and I would think that is one of the key things that why it is so imperative that we have this data set feasibility study. It's because we need the data so that, from across the partnership, so that we can start asking those questions, so that we can start pulling and analyzing the questions, so we can look and see what are we doing across the partnership. And with that said, though, one of the key phrases that the university librarians put in the outcomes of their strategic planning retreat is that the collective collection management work that's done needs to be informed by user need and evidence of use. And I think tying in with that is making sure that we are looking at all of our users and that we are considering what has been our historic practice, what is our future practice, do our collections match demographically what our users are both studying and who they are. So I think those are incredibly important questions, and definitely why we need that data set. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And now we get to hear from all of you. I think we escape out and switch over, right?
Yep, great. And so we're going to switch over now to do some lightning talks. And first up is Heather Gendron. And so we'll run through those and then hopefully have some time for a Q&A at the end. Also, those who are coming in remotely, you do have the ability to chat in questions. So feel free to take advantage of that. Okay.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk briefly about Causeway, the Collaborative Architecture, Urbanism, and Sustainability Web Archive, which is an initiative that's been around for a few years that came out of the Ivy Plus Art and Architecture Affinity Group. And I want to just say, without Samantha Abrams, this would have been very difficult to do. So kudos to the brains around the table that decided to create that position and make it happen. Scope and content, so since 2014, we have collected over 200 websites that we felt were critical and in danger of sort of evaporating, which probably is true for the large share of websites out there. And so our focus has been on architecture, urban fabric, community development, activism, public space, and sustainability. But there are many other sort of subjects beneath those headings, but those are sort of the broad areas that we're focused on. And of course, these are public. This is a public, not all initiatives are public, but this one is public, so you can go into the Archivit site and search and explore the collections we've been gathering. So these are kind of the areas that we've been doing most of our collecting in, and we're going to take another look at this data with Samantha at our October meeting. The Art and Architecture group meets twice a year at the Art Library Society of North America meeting, and then we're hosting the meeting here at Yale in October. So we've been focused on community development, historic preservation, historic buildings, land use, and housing. Those seem to be the trends. And so I had noticed when I was going through with Samantha that public art is one of our areas of focus, but there's almost nothing in there. So I just sent forth maybe like 10 seeds to Samantha for the group to review. Participants, this is the group of participants in this project that have had, we have art and architecture libraries, and I've starred the top graduate programs in architecture in particular because of the Causeway focus, just so you can get a sense of who are the players in this group. So about half of us are in the top 10, according to Architectural Record magazine, which is an important core publication in the field. The process is really easy. Again, thank you, Samantha, and I don't know why I called her Sarah on this slide. Apologies. Maybe I was evoking Sarah Tedesco or something. Yeah, so it's really simple. It's a Google form, asks you to just put in all this information, nominator's name, URL, website title, etc. Pick a subject, and that really is helpful for keeping you in scope, not kind of going off the rails and going rogue. So that's basically the process. And then there's a lot that Samantha does, of course, on her end, and that's why we have a full-time person working on this. Why we collect, so I thought this was interesting. Samantha provided these statistics. About 4% of the sites that we've collected so far no longer exist on the live web. So again, we can't always anticipate which websites are going to go away, but we are trying to, maybe that's something the group can talk about more fully, is how to identify those. And then she's also provided a statistic in terms of how many times these pages have been viewed since the initiation of the project. And I thought I'd throw in just a few things that I've learned along the way working with the group and hearing what they've said in terms of what makes us successful. So again, I would emphasize, try not to go off on your own and probably, start a whole new web archiving project without a lot of support. We have Samantha Abrams, and she's just a built-in web archiving machine. So definitely, it seems like there's no problem. People are, collaborating across the Ivy Plus network and coming up with great ideas. Reference questions can sometimes prompt ideas for new websites to nominate. I've heard colleagues say that, colleagues from Columbia. I like to set a reminder for myself because it's not like, it's not like when you get slips or notifications and say, hey, you have to do this collection of element. So I just try to set a reminder regularly for myself to think about, reflect on what sites might we collect. Some people in the group keep logs, and then they send a bunch of suggestions in all at once, but you can also kind of send them in one at a time and in the moment when you think of it. Always refer back to the scope and content, and also, again, the form really just helps you do that, so it makes it easy. And then we've taken a geographic approach, so I've tended for some other, not the public art stuff as much, but for some projects, just try to focus on New Haven or Connecticut, knowing that other colleagues in the group are going to focus on New York or New Jersey. But then we also are looking for national sites as well. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Killeffer. I'm the Interim Director of Access Services here at Sterling & Bass. I'm here to talk about Bar Direct at Yale today. I think that Bar Direct is one of the better known of the IPL programs. So today I just want to highlight a few aspects that I think are a little less well known. I'm going to look at the history of the program a little bit, and I also want to talk a little bit about usage trends. History. I think we all know that Bar Direct has been around for a long time. I think it might be a little surprising to learn exactly how long. It was first launched in 1999, so way back in the last millennium. So that means we're heading into our 20th year, and just to put that in perspective, that means many of the undergrads who are currently using it are younger than Bar Direct itself. It took a few years to get Bar Direct off the ground. Took about 4 years of planning, working with vendors, handling all the logistical planning. And during that phase, that kind of long planning phase, which is right when I started working here, so I remember it well, it wasn't actually called Bar Direct yet. It was called the Copy Project at that time. And it's an odd name because it was never about making copies of anything, right? So why was it called the Copy Project? It was called Copy because originally there were only 3 partners. And the word copy was an acronym referring to those 3 schools. The CO was Columbia, P for Penn, and you can guess what the Y was for. That was for us, and I like remembering that because it's a reminder that Yale was a part of this cooperative program right in the very beginning. I think that's something we should be proud of. The service was very popular right from the start, and it became increasingly popular as we added new partners, which began in 2002. So looking at some usage trends. These are our lending and borrowing numbers, so how much we're lending out and how much we're borrowing here for the last 5 years. And as you can see, they're very consistent, especially lending. We lend about 27,000 items out every year. It doesn't change a whole lot. Borrowing has a little more variability, but we borrow around 40,000 items every year. I find that consistency a little surprising. I think the lending, that's a little bit about the load leveling aspect of the relay system. Borrowing, those are just coming from patrons, those requests. So those are just, those are real numbers. I find that the consistency surprising, but especially the fact that we're borrowing so much more than we're lending every year. It's 13,000, 14,000 more items every year. That's the reverse of what we see in interlibrary loan. Interlibrary loan, we are by far a net lender. We lend out a lot more than we borrow, but that's not true in Bar Direct. I find it's especially surprising we're not only a net borrower every year, but we're actually the highest borrower every year. We are, as our partners sometimes remind us, we're like the request hogs. We borrow the most every year, and that's been a trend for a long time. I think that's particularly surprising given that we are one of the larger libraries in the partnership, and we don't have some of the direct links to requesting that I know some of our partners have put into their catalogs. We don't have that, and yet we are the request hogs. So it's also a little bit surprising when you think of the usage, the borrowing consistency, when you think about what's going on with our local collection. So we know that with our circulation numbers with the local collection, we've seen a decline every year for many years now. But that's not happening with our Bar Direct circulation. That's holding very steady. And I just think that's interesting that those don't match up. This is a calendar year, so when you see 2018, it's not a huge drop. It's that we haven't finished the year yet, just to point that out. Last thing I just want to share that I think is an interesting trend is that when we look at where those 40,000 books that are being requested here, where are they being picked up? So, and whenever a user is placing a request here at Yale, they have a lot of locations to choose from, a wide variety, and we keep adding. The most recent ones we've added are these distance programs that are being served through the medical library. And when you look at the distribution of where folks are actually requesting to pick those up, you'll see that for many years, the large majority of requests are being picked up at Bass. Some years it's gotten as high as around 75% of the requests. But in recent years, that's started to decline, especially since 2016. We're getting now down closer to 50%. 2016 is a significant year because that's the year that we added Haas as a pickup location at the request of Heather and Lindsay. And immediately, really within that first year, Haas became the second most popular place to pick up Bar Direct books. So I guess I would just say kudos to Heather and Lindsay. It seems like a lot of, we saw the Bass numbers go down correspondingly, so a lot of traffic that was previously going to Bass is now being directed to Haas, so that was clearly a really good decision for those patrons. That's all I wanted to share today about Bar Direct. I hope there was something in there that you didn't already know about. Thank you very much.
I'll just leave your lovely slide up because I didn't prepare a PowerPoint, so I apologize. If you want one, I will make one and to share. So I'm here to talk about the Contemporary Scores Collaborative Collection Development
program that's been going on with the music libraries. But before I launch into that, I will just say that our first initiative was prompted when Princeton joined us in the library, and they immediately declared that she would lend CDs and DVDs through Bar Direct and challenged us to do the same. And it's a challenge that's being rolled out very slowly. But Yale has finally picked up the gauntlet in the last year. We started to lend CDs. Several of our institutions do lend CDs and DVDs through Bar Direct. Around 2008, we decided to try to expand the diversity of actually the number of composers represented, contemporary composers in our collections. And we worked with a vendor who gave us a list of 4,000 contemporary composers of the 20th and 21st centuries. And the 6 institutions at the time went through the list, consulted faculty, and did some trading, and ultimately we expanded our holdings up to 1,500 contemporary composers that we agreed to collect going forward and retrospectively as comprehensively as possible. So part of the goal was to just have physical scores that could be lent very quickly among the Bar Direct libraries. Since then, we've decided to narrow the time frame of these composers. They've got to be alive in 1975 or born after that year, and it was just that a lot of the older composers, we didn't really see as contemporary anymore, and some of them, their works have essentially all been published, and so there's nothing new really coming out. Now about 12 of the 13 institutions are participating, and we're currently collecting 1,722 composers. Of these, 46% are American, but there are 64 other countries represented in this list. And each institution decides it based on their budget and the needs of the institution. So some institutions like MIT have smaller budgets for music and have signed up for fewer composers. We've also got provisions for dropping a composer. For some of these composers, several institutions are collecting them comprehensively, and we just notify each other if we want to drop someone. And then if it's the last institution, we make a big deal of it so that everybody knows there's a composer going off the list unless somebody else decides to pick that composer up. There's a little bit of arm twisting to get an institution not to drop a last composer, but we all know that everybody has a budget they have to work within. Recently, we have tried to beef up younger composers. These are listed as age 45 or younger. And currently, we're looking at the distribution of women composers. At an international meeting this summer, it came out that about only 10% of these composers are women, so we think we need to work at that. But they do represent 30 countries. We're starting to talk about greater diversity among the composers as well. We manage our list on a Google spreadsheet, and there's some issues we run into, and one is that large-scale works cannot often be purchased in score, and that would be symphonies, operas, musical theater. Publishers do not want to sell those scores. They want to offer them as perusal or rental scores only, and that's to protect their royalty stream and copyright. And so this is true for anything that's not in the public domain. So there is, nearly a century's worth of scores that we can't purchase. Occasionally, an institution is able to get a copy from a publisher for their circulating collection. This is now extending down into chamber music. I had a recent request for a quartet by a composer who's actually a Yale alum, and you can't buy the score. We're trying to get a copy of that for our students. Also, scores come with parts, and in many academic libraries, we collect parts for chamber music up to 9 instruments. Most libraries don't collect parts for the big ensembles. That would be the part that you hand out to each individual musician. But a few of our institutions don't collect parts. Another trend is that many of the younger composers are publishing online. Their websites have their current scores, they have recordings, they have videos, they have biographical information. And so we started in 2013 a pilot project to archive composer websites. And we now have 500 websites archived. Thanks again to Samantha and Jean, is it, at Columbia, who've been doing a lot of this work for us. We have identified 970 composers we want to archive. And we're careful not to duplicate the very young composers that are being archived at NYU. We'd like them to join Borrow Direct, but they haven't yet. So we do try to keep an eye on their project and not archive the same composers. They've got about 350 they're working on. And they're focusing on very young composers. But they will broaden in the future. All right, so that's pretty much what I had to say. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, hold questions till the end? Okay. Thank you, Dan.
So I just want to say thank you to Daniel for the invitation to talk today about how Dashers is engaging with IPL, and because I have a lot of information to share with you, briefly I am going to stick to my script. All right. So first I'm going to talk about web archiving initiatives, and then I'm going to talk about collections. So for the Slavic, East European, and Eurasian Studies group, Anna Arase is a co-nominator along with colleagues from Princeton, Columbia, and NYU for a project with a working title, which you can see on the screen. The purpose is to capture websites that express views that differ from those of the current governments. And you can see the more nuanced description from the proposal on the screen. A specific example of this are sites that are included on a list maintained by the Russian Federation's Media and Communications Regulatory Agency, and which are considered to violate the state's laws. So while the list is not browsable, it can be searched individually to confirm if a site is included. And now, whether or not a site is included on this state-sponsored list, it is safe to assume that there are certain types of sites that are in danger of suppression simply because of their content. And these include supporters of the LGBTQ community, various kinds of political opposition, and those interested in documenting history from a non-state point of view. So Columbia has been able to archive ad hoc a few of these sites that were considered in imminent danger of disappearing, but if this proposal is approved, then a more systematic approach will be put into place. Okay. The East Asian Studies Group proposal for web archiving was led by Haruko Nakamura in collaboration with colleagues from Duke, Columbia, and Princeton. And the purpose of this is to document websites of non-governmental, non-profit organizations that provide support to the LGBTQ community in Japan. So while homosexuality has been legal in Japan since 1880, there's still a cultural stigma. Much of the material produced by and about the LGBTQ community is ephemeral. This web archiving project is important because it will capture sites that are currently not crawled by the National Diet Library of Japan, and it will pick up where a similar project by the National Library of Australia left off in 2015. This fly is just crazy. The East Asian Studies Group has noted a rise in graduate student interest in this topic. And this project is also important because it will complement Haruko's work to create a collection of physical Japanese LGBTQ ephemera that's been serviced through manuscripts and archives. Michael Printy, along with 3 colleagues from Harvard, Duke, and Cornell, through the nascent European Studies IPL group, has contributed to a web archiving proposal on extreme right movements. The purpose of the project is to document the proliferation of websites promoting views of the extreme right and populist movements in Europe. And the European Studies Group would partner with the colleagues in Slavic, East European, and Eurasian Studies Group to make sure that all of Europe, including Russia, is covered. One of the difficulties of the project is how to define what falls into this category. So the proposal does an excellent job of delineating their boundaries, and I've quoted from the proposal on the screen. The proposal aims to capture information put out by groups that do officially participate in political processes, but also those that exist outside of those traditional structures. And lastly, for web archiving, the Latin American Northeast Libraries Consortium has put in a proposal with sponsorship from its two IPL members at Columbia and Cornell. And this focuses on Brazilian NGOs. The project would complement the 2014 agreement on print collecting, which I'll get to shortly. Many Brazilian NGOs no longer use print to deliver information, so these valuable resources for researchers are not reaching our libraries physically. This project looks to fill that gap, and also many of these groups have uncertain funding, and so the sustainability of their websites is also an issue. And now on to collections. So for the Slavic, East European, and Eurasian Studies group, there's an unofficial initiative, or I guess I should say project, now that I know the language, underway to collect textbooks from the region, especially post-secondary textbooks on Russian history. And this was already happening at several institutions, and others have taken up the idea when it fits within their institutional collecting parameters. And our contribution focuses on art history textbooks, which supports the strong interest in visual culture by faculty and grad students on our campus. In the Japanese subsection of the East Asia Libraries Group, conversations are beginning about how participation in the Center for Research Libraries digitization programs should be considered in joint collection development conversations. And the nascent Western European subject specialists are beginning a conversation about creating a collections group specifically for the purpose of participating in IPL initiatives such as their web archiving proposal. The group hopes to analyze collection needs and explore collective collection development projects, and one idea under consideration is a pilot focusing on specialized reference materials in Western European humanities, and Mike Printy is playing a lead role in organizing this along with a colleague from Duke. And lastly, I will mention the Brazilian Collections Collaboration, which has been active for 3 years. And actually started under the Borrow Direct NOMER. So 9 other Ivy Plus institutions participate in this agreement with us. The focus is on monographs and gray literature. The participating institutions have divided up Brazil geographically, and Yale's responsibility focuses on 2 states. The majority of the titles collected are available through Borrow Direct. The agreement allows each institution to collect in depth, branching out beyond the publishing products of the 2 megacities, and aims to include a wide array of topics. In addition to history, literature, and political science, there is increasing research interest in topics such as forestry and environmental studies and public health. And now that the project has been running for 3 years, conversations are underway for how best to assess it. And you can follow up with Jonna Krentz for more details on this particular project. And that is the current summary of Dasher's engagement with IPL.
Thanks to Daniel for inviting me to talk a little bit about Ivy Plus and assessment. And as you recall from an earlier slide, assessment is a key stakeholder group in the Ivy Plus community, but we've been a very loose confederation of professionals in this area. We have maintained an Ivy Plus listserv for a few years now, but it's been relatively quiet. Assessment is a really interesting area, and each institution treats it in a slightly different way, and it's kind of grown up in an institution in various ways. And so as a result, our focus is often very much tied to the strategic priorities of the institution. However, we're trying to make some efforts to change that so that we can be a more effective stakeholder group in the future. Just to make sure everybody's on the same page, the role of assessment is to help our institutions demonstrate value, relevance, and the impact of our services. We want to do that at the local and also at the Ivy Plus level. I've been really privileged to be able to participate in the collective collection analysis working group, and I like to think that having an assessment voice at that table has been really helpful in sort of shaping that conversation. One of the things that I'd like to share with you is that we are starting to do some planning around having more conversations amongst the Ivy Plus assessment group. This summer, we did some site visits. I went up to visit my colleagues in MIT and Harvard. I've also done a site visit down in Columbia, and Nisa from Columbia has come up here, and we've had ongoing conversations. However, we're trying to find the best way to work effectively as a group in the context of a lot of other initiatives that are happening right now at ARL and ACRL. We really don't want to be repetitive. We want to make sure that we find what it is that we can bring value to and work together on those initiatives. We are in the process of planning a meetup at the Library Assessment Conference. It's a biennial conference of professionals that's taking place in Houston, Texas from December 5th to December 7th. We're hoping to be able to bring an Ivy Plus cohort together to have some real conversations in person about how we want to get together and work together as a community. So more to come very soon. Thank you.
So I'm Mike Bell, and
Dale Hendrickson.
we're going to talk more about the Bar Direct Shared Index. We heard quite a bit about it already from Heidi and Gladriel, but we're going to try to underscore and highlight a few key points, and then also Dale will talk more about Bar Direct Shared Index and what that means for us here at Yale. So to understand the shared index, it's helpful to provide some context about the Borrow Direct search interface today. And I'll just highlight that big timer sitting there. One of the things that happens when we conduct a search, and I need to stay by the microphone. When we conduct a search in Borrow Direct is the search goes out to all 13 different institutions and slowly brings the result set back. To provide some context, when we do a search in our unified discovery system at Yale, which is called Quick Search, the search immediately hits indices and brings the results back right away. So for the example in the top left there with Books Plus, we're simultaneously and immediately bringing results back from two library systems that are indexed, one being the YUL Orbis and Voyager system, and then the other being the Law Library's Morris system. As opposed to with Borrow Direct today, it's going out to a whole lot of different libraries and slowly bringing those results back. So I'm actually bringing in a few slides from Heidi's and Gladriel's slides. In addition to the points that she had there about some of the shortcomings with the current Borrow Direct interface, also it's a destination. It's its own destination. People go there and they need to know to go there and they need to think to go there, just like if they wanted to go to Borrow Direct or some other database like Web of Science. So another key slide, and I just want to underscore one point of Heidi's goals, making the collective collection look, act, and feel as much as possible like the local collection to the user. So, and so where the Borrow Direct current interface is its own destination, integrating those holdings into and displaying them as our own collective collection is a big goal with the shared index. The content, so this means access, display, and treating it as our own of Borrow Direct's 90 million items rather than Yale's 15 or so million items. So it's like a six-fold increase in content that we're making available to our users when we expose Borrow Direct to them. So key points about what is a shared index. It is all of the Ivy Plus Libraries holdings in a single interface, not having to go out to 13 different library management systems and bring the results back. It is not live calls to each of those systems for Z3950 results. It's just that one single index. It's huge. It's a massive increase in the size of the holdings that we're presenting. And it's designed, the purpose of all of this work is to be incorporated into local institutions' unified discovery platform, not as a separate destination. Now, as we heard earlier, there will be a standalone interface. Some of the key reasons for that standalone interface is so that there's some place to test and some place to troubleshoot, whether that be at a system level or at a item level, needing that confirmation of, well, what is this central perspective seeing? In addition to that, also, we have other institutions that are pretty deep in other major projects, and they won't be ready to implement it. And then there's also a possibility, well, what happens if we can't depend on the relay platform that we currently search on, as an emergency fallback in case that's not there. And there'll be up-to-date holdings through scheduled batch updates. So we saw some detail on the schedule, and don't need to pay too much attention to the details on here, but I just want to point out right now, this month, we're looking at the university librarians reviewing an RFP proposal with the goal and hope, if it's approved, that in October that RFP will be issued. So this is a request for proposal to vendors for someone to build this shared index. And then the intent around December for vendor selection, and then a big heavy lift, a lot of work for each institution and collectively is going to be metadata remediation. There's pre-project metadata remediation and then post-project metadata remediation. This is going to be a big, intense effort at each institution and collectively. Then a very fast development path, looking maybe in the March to August time range, and then different aspects of it. Building it, testing it, deploying it, creating an alpha, so we might actually see something that we can start to test with and even visualize the impact on very early. An alpha version release, a beta version release, and a production release, and then those three key components of the data warehouse, the shared index, and the standalone discovery platform. So there's a very detailed timeline that I don't think it's going to be finalized until that's approved by the ULs, and even then, you see what you get back from the vendors in their proposals. But just to give you a rough sense, if it all goes as hoped, we're looking at having an Ivy Plus shared index platform in place really fast. So at the end of next calendar year, we're going to be collectively looking at how do we do publicity and what's the ongoing support and governance program and model and maintenance and services look like for it. Now this is the schedule for Ivy Plus. This is not the schedule for Yale University, but there are some important key points implied with this schedule for Yale University because there's going to be a need to provide metadata, and that metadata is going to have to be remediated. There are steps, there are deliverables that Yale will have along the way, and I think Dale might talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to hand it over and let Dale talk about what it means for Yale and at Yale.
I'm going to focus on the technical side of it, what it looks like from the lifting that we're going to have to do from the technical back end. So again, this is Quick Search. This is our unified search platform. And as you can see, right now, when you find a particular item, it lists the locations that it can be found. The dream is that in the future, if this is not a holding within the Yale Library, it will be displayed here and indicate where it is and then immediately direct you to the way to fulfill your request. So things that we've really got to think about and work on is how are we going to incorporate this into Quick Search? Quick Search is a very powerful tool, but it's also a very complex tool. Not only how do we integrate it, but what's the experience when those items are actually delivered through the Quick Search interface? how do we integrate and provide the status of the connection of the item? So the connections to the back-end systems that tell the status of the item. So if the item is checked out, we need to be able to indicate to the user that the item is checked out. Those types of data will not be delivered through the shared index to our understanding at this point in time. Based on the architectural discussions, that would be something that's a batch load process. So the status of the item would be more like a Z9 and 35 call. How are we going to handle that? What are our local obligations from the technical and from our functional folks when it comes to supporting the Ivy Plus shared index? So what are we going to do about decisions, planning, and schedules? So there's a lot that we have to do locally when we're talking about, again, pulling this index data into quick search. So we've got a lot of decisions. What's it going to look like here locally? I think I touched on that a little bit. What is the user experience going to be? What are the options that result from the sorting? How are we going to, again, prioritize these items and display methodologies? What about the local and non-local copies? How will we distinguish that so our users have a clue? Or do we not want that? Do we want it to seem seamless? Those are things that we'll have to work on. How to describe and label non-local materials. Is it something that, again, do we want to indicate that? What are the implications of time to delivery, stuff like that? What will we display who can't use Borrow Direct? Let's say someone is not a Yale affiliate and cannot use Borrow Direct. How are we going to indicate to them that this is not an item that they can access through the system? And then how will the law library holdings be presented? This has to do, again, with the Millennium-based system that is the foundation of Morris, as opposed to our Voyager, which has technical implications about how that data is managed. The design and architecture, the architecture of the overall system, those are very important but complex technical conversations that have to be had about how we're going to use this. And again, there's our schedule. And what are we able to actually effectively do within and what that timeline would look like. And then all the other things that we don't know about that will emerge as this is actually developed and when it's actually available for us to start using. So we've got planning and design work ahead. We need to work with our colleagues at law to figure out how we're going to do that. We need to run initial metadata transfers, test runs to see how that goes. Again, what are the metadata cleanup implications that are going to be discovered when we actually start using or start testing these services? And then what do we have to build and maintain locally, and what does the YUL have to commit to going forward in order to support this product locally? So what are the batch updates process look like from our systems to the shared index? How do we integrate our non-lendable items, things that we've identified that we don't want to be part of the Borrow Direct network? So when you do a search in Quick Search, how are those represented or pulled in, recognizing that you're at Yale and you have access to those contents? API integrations, how do we extract data and use it for other purposes? Are there innovative tools that we might be able to develop off the shared index that we need to develop APIs to pull that data and put it into another system? And then, of course, the final integration into Quick Search. So that's a really big question. Again, here's currently our preferred discovery layer for the Quick. It's listed on our main web page, and we want to make sure that this product, Borrow Direct, and the expanded collection that will then become the Yale Library Collections is available and findable for our users.